it's me, Percita, and this is Percita's Paradox. Thank you so much for joining me on this lovely Thursday. If you are a new subscriber, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you about all of life's issues, giving you my wisdom and opinions. And at the same time, if you are a ongoing supporter and you have been with me for a while, I call you my OG. I thank you so much for being a part of the Percita's Paradox experience. So today, I want to talk about triggers. And I want to talk about triggers in the concept of how we actually find ourselves compartmentalizing them and what exactly they are. Now, we can't get into specifics because to try to speak specifically in regards to a trigger, we're going to have to kind of narrow it in to look at it more in a general sense. So when I say we can't say what specifically it is because there's different triggers for different things, but I'm going to generalize the statement about triggers and conduce it down to the premise of just your basic instinct on love. And I'm going to say, what is your trigger to make you honestly believe that you're not being connected or you're not in a sense of feeling or being loved? Now, that's interesting to say off the bat because we all have our own specific experience and life expectance of what love should and should not look like. Generally speaking, though, we can all agree that there's a few characteristics across the board that we would identify that would be identified in the sense of being an emotion that would be tied to love or an action that would be tied to love. So when I say, what is your trigger? I'm interested in knowing, after we had our conversation about trust, if we thought about our trigger and what makes us click in regards to rolling into figuring out how we're going to deal with trust, or if we're not going to deal with trust at all and move on from the individual who has wronged us. I'm interested to know what's the trigger. Now, I like to say I'm just a huge proponent on, life is really about us all having traumatic stresses in our lives. We typically think of post-traumatic stress as being something that I don't believe is true. I say that we all have had some sense of trauma that has caused us an effect that would be identified as a post-traumatic, meaning something that would have happened prior to the hurt. So when I think of trigger, I feel the trigger for me in particular, if I'm talking about the subject at hand, which is love, and when I'm feeling loved, catch what I'm saying, operative word, feeling, and when I'm not feeling loved, the trigger for me boils down to a disrespect. And what I mean by that is that I can honestly say that I don't necessarily look at the action. I look at the respect of the action. Now, that gets a little interesting, but let me say it from this angle. I'm not necessarily mad that there was no food for me to eat. Let's just say it like that. I'm angry at the episode, if you saying that you love me, that even the food that would have been there to eat wouldn't have been something that I would have wanted to eat. So it's almost as if you're not including me in it and you're just taking a blind eye to what I would deem something to consume. That's disrespectful to me because I would never allow there to be any victuals or food in the home that someone couldn't actually have that I know live there with me, be it kid, husband, whatever, right? So I realize in my life that I have said to people things about if they love me, if they didn't, how they love me, so on and so forth. And I've given them a plethora of things that I felt like they should have been doing or could have done to identify that they were loving me. What I'm starting to understand is that you really can't tell a person that they don't love you because whatever their dynamic of love, their definition, their situation that's caused them trauma or happiness and how they've defined love is really based on the individual. Again, we can all agree that there are characteristics across the board that would identify what we generally say is love. The time, the nice words, the affirmational things, the acts of service. I mean, all of the love language things that a Gary Chapman would talk about, right? I agree with that. in the exact same breath, I'm going to say that there's also other aspects of individuals that feel like the things that they're doing or the things that they're saying would make a person feel loved or trigger them to believe that they were loved. My question is, how exactly do you find your points of connection with the individual to trigger that you know that they love you and not you just loving them, or vice versa? It can get a little interesting when you think about it, because again, for me, if I look at, the 5 languages of love, and if you're not aware of that, please, I'll link a picture of the book, Gary Chapman, 5 Languages of Love, excellent book. He in depth speaks about what we all typically, as a general statement, identify as love, and we fall into these 5 categories. And I always get them screwed up, but if I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head, it's acts of service, it's time, it's physical touch, it's I'm missing one. I can't remember right now, but I will list it when I list the books. Whatever those 5 languages are, we typically all fall into one, and some of us fall into multiples of it, right? And what I mean by that is that it all of those things encompass a person to feel like they're being loved. My trigger, when I'm not feeling love, because again, we're talking about what triggers us to not feel loved, is when I'm not being respected. The irony of that story is that I don't know if I can tell you that there's anything particular that you could identify that would say respect in those 5 languages. I think they all, to some degree, identify respect. But I feel like respect would be something completely different. It's not a part of the love language, but it is something that I'm clearly understanding is required in this thing called love if you're identifying yourself to be in love or loving something or someone, right? Because what respect typically means is that you cherish it. It means that you actually identify it as being important. You're concerned about the perception of what that thing or person feels or believes about you. So your attentiveness is within that connection. I don't know if everyone feels as if that's the way they would define respect. I'm just giving you my concept on the way I feel like it would be. And when I'm feeling unloved, it typically will absolutely 99.9% fall under just that title, respect. When I think of other people in my life, I mean, I've literally heard that, it's just the premise of, like I said about my friends a couple of videos prior, you really have to spend time with some people in my life. And if they don't feel that time, then here's the funny part, then they feel unloved. And in my mind, then the unloved that we're talking about would be the trigger, because you're not spending the time with them, and there's the trigger of the time. And I would call that disrespect, and they would call it time. Kind of see what I mean? It's like, it's literally saying the exact same thing without saying the exact same thing. I just realized I don't have one specific thing that I could say would be a trigger. I kind of clump them all together and identify respect as damn near every part of the 5 love languages, if that makes any sense. I'm wondering if I'm the only person that thinks that. I don't think I am. I think we all have a whole identity of this whole respect thing and what that is. And we can go further into it and try to figure out what respect even means. But truthfully, I'm just interested in, like, what's your trigger? What's your trigger for you feeling unloved? What do you call it? Like, what's the name you give it? I give mine disrespect. I know you don't love me when you're being disrespectful. And some may say, well, what if it's an accident? Or what if they're really not trying to be disrespectful? I'm just going to tell you that things are not necessarily always what they seem. I get that. Everything's not intentional. I understand that. Some things just kind of happen by accident. We're not talking about perfection. We are talking about what is the trigger that makes you feel unloved, and what do you call it? That makes it even clearer. Because again, mine is this whole respect thing. And for me, that's my trigger. I have nothing else to call it. It is simply, if you're disrespecting me, there could not be any attempt of love. And I then will say the irony of all of that is that we typically love people the way we want to be loved. So you can see by me saying what I feel like my trigger would be, which would be disrespect, then how important it is for me to give individuals respect. I'm not necessarily the type of person that's going to not be aware of the words coming out of my mouth, along with I'm not going to not be aware of how a person may take it. That does not necessarily always slow me down from what I feel like I need to say, because I feel like truth can and will withstand within itself. But I am conscious of what those truth words are. Because sometimes people just get into this idea of like, if you're speaking truth, then the truth, will set you free, so to speak, and you can just kind of let words fly. And I'm always trying to tell people like, that's cool. And, and we all have a moment when, we there, right? We just pissed off and we want to actually just take it there and stay there because we feel like we have a point to prove. But for me, the respect part comes in just the way you approach a person and the way that you try to speak whatever you're aware their love language is or their communication language is before you're just going to attack them with words. Because words are a very funny thing. They don't really go away. And I will tell you that typically the disrespect that I feel is a trigger when I'm not feeling loved is always verbal. It's almost never something physical. Almost never. So just had to ask. I know I've been like on one for this last week, but it's cold and I'm thinking and I just got a lot on the brain and I wanted to just ask you because sometimes I ponder things that are happening in my life and things that have happened in my life. And you just get to a place where you go, how many other people are feeling what I'm feeling? How many people hate the thought that you're loving someone that's not loving you back and they're not aware that they're not loving you back, but they're in a space where they feel like they're loving you back, but they aren't. What do you do with that? How do you handle it? How do you move forward with it? Because typically when you're not feeling the love, it rolls right back to that word that I just said of disrespect. So I think disrespect is such an interesting statement of a trigger because, again, it can be so many things. Equates to how big and large the word love is, which is why I am now understanding how you can't really compartmentalize the way that you're feeling or the way that you're not feeling because everything kind of touches each other, right? Everything kind of has a moment where it's all on the exact same plate and there are no divides. It's just the premise of everything that you're feeling at that moment, and that feeling is real and that's what you want to be in. The irony of all of this is that I have still learned that those feelings are very fleeting. So you still have to be very conscious of it. But we still have triggers. We still have experiences. We still have words. We still have things that have happened to us that cause our interactions and relations with others to sometimes grow difficult. So I just want to know, what's your trigger? What's your trigger in this thing called love? Because that's the one thing that we can talk about. We could easily talk about kids, or we could talk about work, or we could talk about, other things that would be a trigger in the scenario. But typically love, because love has been identified as something that can conquer all, and love is something that we all have to show to really have a great life just in general, to just humankind across the board. I'm interested in knowing what exactly your take is on what you feel and what that trigger is, what happens, what's said to cause you to believe you're not being loved. So I know, pray for me. I'm just all in a space of, I just want to know. I just want to know week. Next week, we'll get into something more deep and I'll try to come with a little bit more of the angle of me knowing. But this week, I just kind of wanted to take the inquisitive road and just figure out, what are you thinking? I know what I'm thinking. But sometimes it's nice to hear your angles and your identity of what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking about a situation. And maybe, just maybe, we can bounce ideas off of each other. So, as usual, I know, again, as always, all I can say is I need you to do 3 things. And those 3 things are: live life authentic, Live it. Live it to the best of your ability. Live it in a manner that you're unapologetic. Live it in a manner where you're continuously living and learning and being okay with that. Make absolutely no mistake that there will be the critics, there will be the people who do not agree, and make no mistake that those are not the people who were given the vision that you were given. So stay your course and live your life authentic. Thank you so much, as usual, for joining me. Check out all the other videos. Hit me on all the videos if you can. Go back and comment on as many as you can. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you continue to share. Make sure you hit the notification button and binge on Percita's Paradox this weekend. I mean, if you're bored and you have nothing else to do and you're broke because you spent all your money on Valentine's Day, hey, I'm free. Check me out. All right? Do what I'm saying. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.